can you get a fever from cutting teeth?
Yes.
Mary says yes. Folks, we've had doctors, pediatricians says no, that's not true. So doctors, what I'm trying to say is doctors can be wrong. Or let's say you get a vaccine, name one off, measles, mumps, rubella, and you get a shot, and you get a temperature from that, or the baby has got a fever. Is that true? And then I've heard doctors say that isn't true. So I can't believe everything a doctor says. I mean, he's just a man too. I don't believe everything a doctor says. I just don't. But there's some truth, and then there's some things that are, there's a lot of speculation. Now, when I take a baby to the doctor and the baby's crying and the baby's sick, I don't know how the doctor knows what's wrong with the baby. The baby can't talk, yet they can give an accurate diagnosis. So I don't want to say doctors are bad. I'm just saying we're bringing up a medical thing here today. And that is a woman's, what is it? Her cycle? Menstrual cycle? Her cycle. All right? Her cycle.
Okay.
And so every brother back there said it's every 28 days. I'm not a doctor. And I've never researched this, and I'm not a woman, and you women may know a little more about it, but you said 28 days.
I used to be married to one.
You used to be married to one, so it's every 28 days. Now, the wife said it could fall short, it could fall long, but I don't sit here on a calendar marking them down or keeping his history, but I'm sure there are people, it could be online, they keep history of this stuff. Some women have it worse than others. Some it doesn't affect people. Could it affect a race differently than any other races? Could it affect different races different ways? When we watch these movies, and let's say about Latinos, they say it's that hot Latino, what do they say?
Blood? Temper?
Yeah, it's a temper. What?
Spirit.
No, well, they say, well, it's that hot Latino, whatever it is. Well, maybe she's got a period going on. Or it affects the woman. I don't think of that of Latino men. I only think that of Latino women. Now, if it's men, and men go off the deep end, in the Bible, what men go off the deep end in the Bible? Anybody know what men go off the deep end in the Bible? I mean, they go off the deep end, folks. You got to be around them. I was around them in college. What men go off the deep end? And it's not the women. And God calls in this that they will be a what? It's a race of people. An Arab. And what is God called? He is a
Wild man.
He's a wild man. And it's the, have you seen, well, I guess Omar, what's her name, and the squad, they're off the deep end. They are off the deep end. But I think it affects more the men than the women. So here, 1 Timothy chapter 2, if we start in verse 12, but I suffer, I suffer not a woman to teach. She's not supposed to teach, nor to usurp the authority over the man, but to be in silence. Father, bless now this lesson. And maybe we reveal some truth in it now, Lord. And hopefully not just some truth, but all truth. For Adam was first formed, then Eve. But Adam was not deceived. Remember, she came out, and that's another topic. She came out of man. And Adam came out of the earth. And Adam was not deceived. So he's not the one who's easily tricked. But the woman being deceived was in the transgression. Notwithstanding, she shall be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith and charity and holiness and sobriety. She shall be saved. And the only one I've ever read about in modern commentaries, I've never read it years ago, is Peter S. Ruckman said, and what she's saved from, and the saving that she's being saved from is from being tricked or deceived. Tricked or deceived. And childbearing. And he says there's something about it, it'll be, just for argument's sake, I picked 2 dates. When she's 10 years old, she starts, people, I don't want to be interrupted. I know an 8-year-old, I don't want to be interrupted like that. So a 10-year-old, and it's over when she's 50. So between the ages of 10 and 50, this problem is ongoing. Is an ongoing problem. She shall be saved from being tricked from 10 years old to 50 years old. If they, plural, husband and wife, continue in faith, we don't have to go beyond that. Faith, charity, and holiness with sobriety, being sober. And I don't mean being drunk, but being aware of what's going on around you. If they continue in the faith. If the husband drops off the cliff and decides to act like a nincompoop, then the wife has got a problem. She can be easily tricked. Because my husband went nuts. Well, then she can be tricked too. But this being deceived with a woman being, not with, she should be saved in childbearing. So during this childbearing age, she too can be tricked outside of the husband. She can be tricked, deceived, and not act holy. And she's not watchful with this being careful and sober-minded. And so the idea here is that if the woman is likened unto the moon, and I won't ask rhetorical questions, I'll just give the answers. Rhetorical questions is, she's likened unto, and then we have to think about it. We'll just give you the answer. She's likened unto the moon, the man's likened unto the sun. So the moon goes through its phases. In how many days? That's a rhetorical question. I said I wasn't going to do that. Every 28 days? I'm not an astrologer or astronomer. Not astrologer, an astronomer. And so, to say it's 28 and a quarter days, whatever it is, it's every 28 days. Well, how often does a woman have a problem? We'll say 28 days. Let's make this really, really simple. So she's like the moon. She goes through this problem every 28 days. You didn't have the problem. You said, well, I didn't have this problem. Well, if the woman is pregnant, she doesn't have that problem. So every 28 days you have this problem, and the phase changes. So it's 28 days. Since it's a lunar thing, not a solar thing, it's every 28 days. So it's at the end of the month, it's at 7/8 of the month, it's at the middle of the month, 3/4 of the month, and now it's at the middle of the month, and it's at the 1/3 of the month, and it's at the quarter of the month, and so it's always going a little bit backwards as far as the phases. So she has, and I've read this with older commentaries, not anything new, is they use the phase of the moon and say, well, if you have a new moon, the moon is dark. So there is a period of time when the church or the woman doesn't really act holy. So the church goes through phases where the church is not holy at all. They're just off the rails, and they're not doing right. And then there's a time when it's a full moon, and this is the woman, we're talking about the woman, where everything is bright and sunny. It's a full moon reflecting off the sun. And everything is happy-go-lucky. And the man sits around, the husband sits around, well, why is everything great and why is everything bad? Well, if you liken it unto her phases, is she's going through her problem. And I liken it unto when I take my prednisone. When I take my prednisone, I finally got with the program. I would warn the wife and kids I'm on my pills, and then I learned how to control it by saying I'm going to go off the rails here. So I don't want to excuse my sin, but I knew what was causing it for me to lose control of myself. And so these old commentaries will make comments about the moon as far as a new moon and a full moon, of why the church goes through these phases. So a woman naturally goes through these phases every 28 days where she Why is she out of sorts? So what's the first thing God, let's make this as simple as it can be. Now we know that there's some things hard to understand in the Bible. This is not one of these hard things to understand. I think it's really, really simple. And God decided, let's cure the problem before it even begins. His first command to Adam and Eve, chapter 1, I looked it up, I decided to look it up today. His first command to Adam and Eve was to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. So if the very first thing on the wedding night that she becomes pregnant, it removes that menstrual cycle of being deceived and easily tricked in her childbearing age, because that phase of the moon is gone. And it's going to be gone for the 9 months. I don't think this is wild, and I don't think this is something hard to grasp. That's the very first command that he makes. So half the problems that Adam and Eve, I'm not saying that we don't have the sinful nature. I'm not saying that. I'm saying half of these problems are automatically removed. And she's the one that has the problem. Well, then you got these women say, well, we've had marital problems, and I tried to solve the problem, and I said, well, I'll have another child. But you weren't the one with the problem, so having the child wasn't going to solve the problem. It's the guy that had the problem. He was on drugs, he's cuckoo, whatever makes him cuckoo. Because if they continue in the faith, he didn't continue in the faith, he's half cuckoo. But it had nothing to do with the menstrual cycle, it had everything to do with sin, not this menstrual cycle. So having more children, you shouldn't have more children in that situation, he needs to get right. But in the woman's situation, it's right to say have more children because she has this menstrual cycle problem. And God said, I didn't say it, God said it. The very first thing, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. So he's the doctor that said, well, and the counselor, he said, well, why don't you have some children? And so they didn't have children until Genesis chapter 4. In Genesis chapter 3, they fall. So she probably, now I'm jumping to a conclusion. She was in the middle of her menstrual cycle. She's twisted like a pretzel. And she's not consulting her husband, and she listened to the devil, and she fell, and she did what she shouldn't do. And Adam jumped right on board because he just dumb as a brick. And we give 3 or 4 reasons why he jumped on board. He's a type of Christ, he wanted to die for her, he wants to live with her, etc., etc. I personally believe this makes full, total sense.
Amen.
I don't think this is off the reservation at all. The very first thing he says is have kids. My wife spent her whole life pregnant.
She's not cuckoo.
Well, during all that time, she was so like, and she only wanted to talk to human beings because it's just these little kids. She couldn't even have a conversation. She spent her whole life that way. And the only time she had a chance to go cuckoo was in between kids. But there wasn't much time in between the kids. It was just boom. And then finally, at the end, they removed all the hard work. So all the cuckoo-ness went bye-bye. It goes bye-bye. And so the childbearing years were over. It makes perfect sense to me. And that's why God commanded him to have children, so she wouldn't have this problem that was going on. Is that the whole thing in a nutshell? Did I read anything out of that? So when a girl says, well, I decided to have more kids so it would solve our problems, but lady, you weren't the one that had the problem. The problem was with the husband. So at that point, having more kids, you would say, no, you shouldn't have any. He needs to get right because he's smoking marijuana, whatever he's doing. But when the woman's off the reservation, it's because of her cycle. She needs to get pregnant. That's the very first thing God commanded. I think it's as simple as it gets. And half of those problems then go away. All the problems don't go away, but half the... If you ever notice these fundamental churches where we were around 7 kids, 11 kids, 9 kids. Another one had 6 kids. They had 5 kids. Well, the wife was always pregnant. She doesn't have this cycle problem going on. And so everything is going just tootsie-wootsy. And so at least half of those problems are gone. Not to say that people don't have problems, and it's because of their sin nature. But let's not point the finger when they have these problems, and you can make them aware of the problem. They could deny it up and down. They could get even angry at you. But I say that's the way to cure the problem.
Another thing that might fit in there is Jesus is the sun, and what blocks the light on the new moon?
I didn't bring that up.
The world, the flesh, and the devil.
In the world, the flesh and the devil blocks that to make the phases of the moon. So you got a quarter moon, a new moon, a half moon, 3/4 moon, what do they call that? A waxing moon and a waning moon.
Right, so you said the new moon is when, the unholy crazy time, Jesus is being blocked and the world's getting in the way.
The world, flesh, and devil is getting in there. Right? And that isn't talking about, and the world, flesh, and devil isn't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a physical problem. I don't think we could blame it on the world, flesh, and the devil. World, flesh, and the devil, that's the sin part. And that's where most everybody's going to go.
Well, it does say it's conditional. They both have to continue in faith.
And I use the thing they. I do. I bring that up. I'm not excluding the guy. Because I say the woman's problem is double because she's got her physical problem, but if he jumps ship, then she's got a double problem. A double problem. But yeah, that blocks the sunlight of the sun. The Son of God. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense to me. Chew it over and just think about it. It makes sense to me. Anybody have any rebuttal to it? Maybe you think I'm just off the reservation. I don't think I'm off the reservation. I think it makes pretty perfect sense. The cycle runs true just like the moon. With a new moon, yes sir.
There's a lot of people that are on birth control that are just crazy and never have a cycle.
The wife brought that up. Now say or say it again. She brought it up.
I just believe sin is the problem. But,
You don't want to go to the physical problem. You want to just go to the sin problem.
sure,
I didn't ask for that. No, I asked what you said.
Does it have an effect on a person? Absolutely. But
Does it have an effect? Absolutely.
Let's just say a Christian could be on birth control and not have a cycle for 10 years, and they could be just absolutely crazy.
Well, I think but you see, she's still sitting doing the other thing.
Well, if you look at also liberals, these liberal women in their 20s and 30s don't have babies, and what are they doing? They're usurping authority and they're just crazy.
And they're probably all on birth. I'm just saying they're probably on birth control or not having a cycle.
I'm not trying to, and I did preface this, I'm not making excuses.
I understand what you're saying. Okay.
Well, isn't it both? A woman has to continue in faith and charity as well, so she has to live a holy life as well.
And she did when she does that.
But it's not all 28 days either. It's only,
It's like
it's only whatever 5 days, so it's not, she's not
Once
crazy
every
the whole
28
time.
days, you have this 5
Wait,
days.
no, say that again?
It's not all 28 days, and she's nuts.
No, it's only for the, and we have a nurse here who probably answered this better, is that
Where she's,
it starts it, and then it reaches its peak, and it's waxing and waning.
you're talking about where she's not mentally, she's tricked, yeah, so she's vulnerable is the word I would use for that time.
I mean, there's some truth. If you break your leg and you might have a little bit of a weak point though.
Could there be an element of truth to what I just said?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do.
Joe says there's an element of truth
I
to it.
agree, but you're not.
Well, chew the cut over.
What Buster's saying is, it's sin,
Well, this isn't being discussed anywhere.
So for the 20 days, it's sin. Buster, what you're saying is for the 20 days.
It's good that it is.
The other 5
No,
days.
I think it needs to be openly discussed, especially in big
Well, he's
liberal
saying that
churches.
your problems are because of.
No, Dad.
Say it.
For
And I'm
5 to
saying
7
if you got birth
days,
control,
she's
it's
vulnerable.
Crazy.
Yeah.
The other 20-some days, she's sinning, is what Buster's saying.
Yeah, but less vulnerable because
Yes.
she's not twisted like a pretzel.
Yes, I agree. I see what you're saying.
Well, you can say blackmail, I mean, you're vulnerable to get blackmailed, and you're gonna continue.
Say that again?
Blackmail, I don't know, but you're compromised, you know, and I don't know, I think there's a lot of things that could.
Well, I want to make it simple. Joe's saying the world, flesh, and devil is blocking the Son of God, which is true. I would definitely go there. But doesn't it seem odd that her cycle is the same cycle as the moon? Not after the sun. And that there's a good time and a bad time? Yes.
But you're saying she had a period before the curse, so I'm just saying, did she have a period?
She did.
Oh, you know what? Others would go there and say she never
Is
did.
that part of the curse?
Well, there's others, references that they didn't even have blood in their veins.
I'm just-
They'll go as far as to say, now we're talking ultra fundamentals, that there wasn't even blood in the veins.
Water.
That the moment she bit, that's when blood came to be. I don't know about all that. I mean, those are some bizarre doctrines.
Refer to the forbidden fruit as a grape.
And I'm thinking about people that I've been personally involved with in discussions and major, awful things that have happened. And I'm not going to go there because it's supposed to be big secret. But we're talking federal prison and murder. And could the girl have been in the middle of one of those cycles when that happened? When she made those awful choices and murdered because she was twisted like a pretzel in the middle of that where she can't even think straight. I don't know. And she could think straight. And I wasn't there, yes. Well, I want to hear from the nurse.
I've been through some mighty tough times in my life, but I would never contemplate neutering someone. That's like you see in the movies, these people who want to drink and then go fornicate. You have to have that in you to begin with, or something has to be there. You're doubled up, pretzeled up, and
Well, Christians do murder, yeah. Well, we're talking now the world, flesh, and devil, that's the other side of the
It's not
story.
making an excuse. You're not
Like I said, I'm not making an excuse for the behavior, but it could be a source of the behavior, could be a possibility of why people behave the way they do.
you gotta have a weakness to begin with.
Yeah, well, and then say, well, I'm going to have more kids. In one case, it's for the betterment. And for the other case, it only makes it worse. You just add more problems into the marriage. So sometimes I think God was the first counselor, and he said, be fruitful and multiply, so you have kids. Be fruitful, have kids, and half your problems will go away. Now, he doesn't say that. Half your problems will go away. I don't know. You say that it sounds like there could be, I'm fishing, that there could be something there. Joseph, there could be something there.
No, well, I mean, the Bible's plain that a woman can be deceived.
And she
Now,
could be
I would think if she's got enough Bible in her, and she has a husband that's going to lead her, then it's not going to be a problem.
yeah. That's right, exactly. So when I take my prednisone, I may be an equivalent to having a period. I take my prednisone, I'm going to be bad for 5 days. 5 days. I've got to do what the Bible says. I have a choice. I can either lose my, I'm just going to use losing my temper. Temperance, right? If I lose my temper, that's a sin. That's a sin of the flesh. If I take my prednisone, folks, you better hightail it out of there. But I learned to say, I better continue in faith is the moment I lose my temper, well, I didn't continue in the faith. And so when she has this problem, she takes her prednisone. It's not prednisone, you know what I'm talking about. She has her cycle. She loses her temper. And she goes off that, and some girls have it real bad, and others don't have it at all. That can vary. And I said, could it affect different races different ways? Such as, and we brought up the Muslim, he will be a wild man. That's a whole race of people, and you see the squad, the way they act. Crazy. And then you heard of the hot Latino anger. Could it affect different races differently? I'm just throwing these things out. There could be a certain amount of truth to it. So chew the cud, weigh it out. So when the counselor, who is lost, they go see a counselor. And the counselor might say, it's like a flip of a coin, 50-50. He said, we'll have another baby. He flips the coin, he says, we'll have another baby. Another counselor says, don't have another baby. And let's say they're both lost. Well, it's 50-50. If the woman's got the problem, it may solve the problem. He was right. If it's the guy who's got the problem, he's smoking marijuana, it isn't going to solve her problem. It's just going to make more problems. It's a 50-50 chance on that. Or you could weigh the problem out. And I'm not discrediting the world of flesh and the devil and your own sinful nature. I'm just saying what could be. Isn't it amazing that that cycle follows the cycle of the moon? And it's a type of woman in the church. And they write, and judgment begins at the house of the Lord. And if you read a lot of verses, where is this verse? Go to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians, I think Bus brought this up. 1 Corinthians 5. Find the part. Where it says the Gentiles don't even do it first verse. It is reported commonly, this is going on in the church, not this church, I'm just saying, reported commonly that there's fornication among you. And he's going for the jugular here, an awful sin. For such fornication as is not so much named, the guy's got his father's wife he's living with. But it says, as so much as named, it's not even named among the Gentiles. So he's saying, saved people are doing this. Evil in the church. And he's pointing to the world and saying, the world doesn't even do that. The world doesn't even do that. So the church can live just as evil, if not worse, than the world. That's what he's saying. You say, well, that guy's not saved. No, in 2 Corinthians, he's trying to get him back. So there's not over much surfeiting or over much. In other words, if you make this person so sorrowful, they'll never be restored. And it says to kick him out too, by the way. Turn him over to his flesh to the devil so that he'll be saved in the day of the Lord. And he said, but in 2 Corinthians, he said, now enough's enough. Forgive them. He wants forgiveness and have him come back in. Enough's enough. And so on. But I think there's a certain amount of truth to what I said. All right, Ezra. And you know what? We are out of time. I think that was I know that was a side thing. So consider that. Consider all of that, what I just said. We've got two people who are on board, not as factual, but as, boy, there must be something there. So before we make rash judgments and stupid statements, just relax. You know, when I listen to people like that, and I do listen to people like that are just spouting it off. I mean, just spouting it off, up and down and left and right. I take mental notes. I just sit there, you know what I do? I shut my mouth, and I don't fill in, so you don't get a word in edgewise. You know, the edge of the paper, you can't get a word in it there. You get it in there. I just sit there and I listen. I don't make grunting and groaning noises. I don't mutter under my breath. I just shut up. I listen. The wife and I had a little, not a tip. She said, I don't know how you can be against homeschooling. And you preach homeschooling, which I don't, but you're against homeschooling. I am, just to make sure that you understand this, I'm 100% against homeschooling. I'm against that. And you say, well, you have to have the definition of that. What does that mean? So the number one topic was homeschooling. You're against homeschooling. You're for homeschooling. Number one, I'm 100% against homeschooling. I am against it. Against it. So I'll give you my illustrations. Can you teach calculus? I've had 2 years of calculus and advanced calculus. Can you teach calculus?
Just because.
And then you say, well, you got to go to the university for that. No, they have pre-calc and they have calculus in high school. Can you teach calculus? No. Most everybody here in America it's 8th grade math. I don't care what you call it. Consumer math, algebra. You know, they have to do it on the labels. They used to do it on the what is the better volume, which is the great value. It's called algebra. And by the way, it's algebra 1. You can't teach algebra 1. You cannot teach that. So I'm against homeschooling because you can't teach it. The mother cannot teach it. Are there mothers who can? Yes. Can you teach music? Can you teach somebody how to play the piano? Can you teach music? There's not a musical note in your body. Can you teach, name something else off. Can you teach literature, foreshadowing? Can you teach that? Do you want to teach that? Do you know what it takes to teach that? And then when you got 5 different kids on 5 different grade levels, 7 kids on 7 different grade levels, who's kidding who? So what is homeschooling? Let's define homeschooling. All you're doing is keeping your kids away from a bunch of animals. And you hire a private tutor to come into your house to teach them via a television or a monitor. You call that homeschooling? That's not homeschooling. That's a private tutor. That's a private school. You're sending your kids to a private school and you're housing them in your house. That is not homeschooling. That's not homeschooling. Anybody wants to say that's homeschooling, you're kidding yourself. You're sending your kids to a private school. And if I was a mother, I wouldn't want to homeschool any of my kids. I would want to go gardening, cooking, maybe go to the store, and I would plug that television in and say, listen, and homeschooling is nothing more than keeping your kids glued to the monitor. That's what homeschooling is. But those that say that you can only train them as deep as you can train. And if you've had 8th grade math and you barely pass that, that's as far as they're going to get in math. And anything beyond that is I can't say how stupid that is. It's just stupid. I mean, you've got to be a woman who's a supermodel. They don't exist. All right, preaching in 10 to 15 minutes.